I'm Leslie Grossman, and currently I am living in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I'm working as an independent artist right now. I'm doing a little freelance stuff on the side. I'm involved with a really incredible communal print shop called Second State Press. I'm going to give them a little shout out there. So I do kind of a work exchange there, and I have been for almost 5 months now. I was born and raised mostly in the Midwest, and traveled a lot. And my upbringing is very transient. I have a very transient lifestyle. But I went to my undergrad at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, and continued on with my master's at University of Tennessee, where SGC is going to be held this year. I hope that all of y'all are going. After that, I moved to Iowa for about a year and 9 months. I was there for a position at a university as a director and curator of a gallery. I've remained very active in curatorial and gallery management positions for about 7-8 years now. So that's kind of something that I enjoy doing on the side, and as a career, I'd like to keep on doing that. Right now I'm in Philly. Really, my work, even though from series to series, it's vastly different. Maybe not so much visually, because I'm sure that y'all have noticed that I love circles a lot. And circles are a big part of my work and have been for, a number of years now. Um, I think that there's so much difference in, from one series to the next, that it may be hard sometimes to pin down what I'm trying to say or where all of my ideas stem from. And really, it's a culmination of my interest in time and history and home and environment and change and stability. Like, there's a lot that goes into it, but I think that all of my series actually are all encompassing of these particular concepts and interests. So these mark-making devices that I made, they actually were kind of recorders of conditions of specific circumstances that are created with this kind of what happens when approach. And, they documented little nuances of the environment, and I utilized nature and natural forces to energize or catalyze these machines. I have this, image in mind when I made these, and then I kind of worked backwards from that. So, for instance, in Gusts and Lack Thereof, I imagined a marker making this beautiful bleed, and how that can happen organically on the paper if it just sets on the paper, and how that is related to the erratic nature of wind, and how it comes and goes and comes and goes, and how there can be these big gusts and this big movement that we can't actually see unless it carries with it particles of dust or moves an object around. So I employed these very simple, the simple device, this pinwheel, and it was attached to a gear, and that was, had this little marker stuck into it. And when I made contact with a paper and the wind spun the pinwheel around, then it then spun the marker around. And whenever the wind dies down, then the marker just sits and bleeds on the paper. So it actually is following the spirit of the wind. And It's there are a lot of these like constants that are brought into it, and there are these intentions that I kind of built into these machines. So um, I do have some sort of control over the outcome, but really in the end it is a big collaboration, and there are these little surprises that happened. Why not? First of all, I mean, why be a painter? No, no, I'm not trying to knock painters. Um, no, printmaking involves so many different techniques and materials and processes. Um, it's very scientific, but it's also very exploratory. It's ubiquitous. I mean, it's everywhere. Um, and it can also be this real basic concept, but then it can also be extremely complex and evolved and involved. Um, but printmaking for me um, kind of brought all of my interests together. For a number of years, I was really into 35 millimeter black and white film photography. And, I was developing in the darkroom. And, the darkroom was actually this place where science and art kind of came together for me. I'm like, oh man, I suck at science and I'm good at art, but I really love science. So I'll just like make this happen in the darkroom. Um, but so I know that like my interest in photography was absolutely a part of my, it contributed to my initial interest in printmaking, especially screen printing, which is what I started off with, is just basement screen printing. And then I just dabbled in like painting and ceramics and mosaic. I was making dioramas and jewelry. I was just like all over the place. And I love crafting too. I knit. But so I was dabbling a lot, and I'm essentially just a tinkerer, which I think all printmakers are tinkerers. And so yeah, why printmaking? Because I love to tinker. I think that's a good answer. So does the process drive the concept? Yes and no. You know, First of all, I think like what I'm interested in my work is change and stability at the same time. So there is that kind of stable notion of the concept, which is always changing anyway. And then there's the process, which is perceived as stable also, but it changes. So I have this like inherent battle of like I love change, but I love stability because, I think I have this transient upbringing that I've sort of been programmed into like accept these challenges of like learning new environments and new streets and new buildings and like new processes of just getting from point A to point B. But then there's, my comfort in finding that perfect route that I take to work every day through, across the city. And it's like, I eventually just like will never deviate from that one route. But, you know, with process, like I'm actually more driven by the discoveries that are made and like those super crazy surprises that come up in the process. So I think maybe it's more like that, like ooh moment, that like oh my gosh, it worked, like aha, like I got it. And I think that's what really drives that concept, or like is the vehicle, I think, for the concept. Um, and maybe that's why I pick up new materials constantly because I want that aha. And like that's what I'm addicted to is like the ooh, like that moment. And it even It even happens in, sorry, I'm like running here. It even happens like in screen printing still for me. I mean, I've been screen printing for years and years, and um, there are so many stages that you go through in order to get that final image that was up here initially, like get that final image on paper or your t-shirt or whatever. And so there's like this to the matrix to the coating the screen, and then you expose it on the screen, and then you're mixing up your colors, and then you're actually printing it. And there are so many things that could happen along the way that could like disrupt it, that like every time I pull my first print and I look at it, I'm like shocked, like, oh my God, this worked. Which it's like, well, yeah, of course it worked. Like it's like it's screen printing. Like, how badly can I screw this up? Like after so many years, but still, like I love those surprises. So you know, but in some of the work, like namely those circumstances pieces, like the process is so very important because the results from the process, like so all those prints and drawings, without that, they're too abstract. They're too minimalist. Like those prints on their own, they're just arbitrary for me. They might be pretty, but without that full disclosure of the collaboration that happened, um, it just doesn't make sense. And I think like, I'm giving credit where credit is due. Well, I'm actually making an edition right now for an exchange, and I am involved in exchanges for sure. I love being a part of that. It is a collaboration. I love collaborations. I always go about it the most difficult way. Like right now, I'm working with transfer paper, so I'm like drawing each single like print, and I'm like, why am I doing this? Like over and over. It's like, why don't I just make a traditional print? Like, why don't I just make a litho? Because I actually like make these promises to myself every day. Like, I'm gonna grain a stone. I'm gonna make I'm gonna make a lithograph. Like almost daily, I do that. But I don't. It's like, and that it hasn't been permanently penned into my planner yet, um, but if I can be frank, I am absolutely humbled by the traditional printmaker, like on a fairly regular basis. Most of my printmaking counterparts, they are just like bonkers with a litho crayon and etching needle. I mean, they just amaze me on any time that I see, my counterparts work. Um, and I'm comfortable with my abilities to etch a plate and to print an edition of intaglio plates or prints. Um, but I just don't believe at this point that that medium and that process communicates what my work is about. Um, and I've studied alongside and under some extremely amazing artists who employ that traditional technical process to create prints. And, that's where I started. But I don't condone approaching printmaking with an outside of the box mindset unless you have practiced or at the very least made editions of prints using traditional methods. I think you really need to know what, actual printmaking is before you say, I'm a printmaker. Uh, Regarding my interest in what is a print, though, I have this super simple definition that, um, really just a print is this transfer of information from one thing to another, and that's it. Um, I mean, if you think about it, the matrix can really just be anything. I mean, you can go so far as to say, like, my mind is the matrix, and my hand is the printing press, and the drawing is the print. But I think that's a little, it's going a little too far outside the box there. But really, like, I love assigning making rubbings as an introduction to printmaking, because something so simple like that we're all familiar with from, like, we did this like at recess or in like art school and in grade school. But it opens up that, like, boundlessness, that discussion of the boundlessness of the medium, while also discussing the very root of what I believe printmaking is, and that's just transfer. Well, first of all, I got really obsessed with the word okay, because it's this word that's very ubiquitous, it's everywhere, and it's international, and it's really like the only word that has this international ubiquitousness. And it has so many different inflections too. Like, you can use it as, an introduction, you can use it as a conclusion, you can say, like, okay, or okay. And it's, I think just that one single strange word that has this, like, very skewed history of the origin of the word. Um, I thought that was really perfect to repeat, because with this stamp that should be, it's this idea of this self-inking stamp being the same image over and over. But when it's right next to one another, you see all these variations, and you see the uniqueness. And regarding the multiple, it's um, and having that repetition, you see that organic growth happen when there is repetition of this repeated motif over and over. So, when there are multiples of a single image exhibited right next to one another, eventually there's going to be a flaw in the system, whether it be by your own hand or by this machine that's apparently perfect. But, exact replication cannot ever happen. It's virtually impossible, even in, a parallel universe. It's impossible to have exact replication, same atoms, same everything. So, you know, I suppose that, like, I'm able to just, like, recognize those the uniqueness of, of one single thing when there are many of them, and where there's this sense of, like, homogeneity in the present. Yeah. So, when there are more similar structures, there are more variations. I think that's kind of quite simply put there. So I should mention that that atmosphere and that, like, simulated erasure of that look of the chalkboard, it's absolutely contrived. Everything is. So, these are screen prints that, while they're still wet, I've been smudging them out with my hand and smearing them and wiping them away before they've actually dried. And, so it's kind of my intention, um, is, making this facade of this more permanent medium to imitate a medium that's very ephemeral, and there's this kind of unmethodical approach to wiping away a chalkboard, but you still see that the remnants of what was on there. And I think that that's, first of all, very beautiful. Like, I love erased chalkboards. I think they're absolutely gorgeous. And it's so sad to see them disappearing in classrooms, because I spent so many years just, admiring this atmospheric quality of the chalkboard. So that said, they're not so much about teaching lessons to others. Um, Even though they have this like diagrammatic approach and, infographic approach, kind of in the way that David Byrne's visual art is. I don't know if you're familiar with David Byrne of the Talking Heads. He's this incredible visual artist too. And, if you like that diagrammatic work and infographic work, like, definitely look at his, Arboretum is, oh my God, I love that one. It's like a sketchbook of diagrams all in different shapes of trees. Anyway, I'm digressing here, but so they don't, like, these prints aren't actually for teaching other people. They're kind of little reminders of myself, to like, that kind of articulate like my struggle and my, well, not so much struggle, but like, they just remind me to compromise and find balance and allow requital to happen naturally and not force that to happen concurrently. Because, I do struggle with, like, if I'm given something, I should take it and give back immediately. Or I have a hard time asking for help. And it's okay, because it's all going to come full circle back. So they're more lessons that, that I'm trying to teach myself. But they're kind of difficult for me to talk about right now. So yeah, they do have a pedagogical approach, but it's more like for reminding myself of these things, these lessons. The end result prints, some of them, they actually do need the support of the documented support of the process in order to convey the concept more clearly. Like I said, like, certain images are just like arbitrary without that. And they can just look pretty all that I want. It's great. They look pretty. But where they come from means so much to the work and makes it that much more interesting to me. So that said, like, I think that there are prints and drawings that I make that do stand very well on their own. And the drawing process involved, particularly with the section in there titled Reflections and Reconsiderations. That series is actually, that drawing process is very pertinent to the work. And the work is actually this evidence of a repeated gesture that, seemingly these images should look exactly the same, right? But they don't. They yield this organic and kind of random growth. But I don't believe that there is, this, say, photographic or video documentation of the labor that's really necessary, since it's pretty apparent in those drawings and those prints that there was this very laborious act. Plus, I think that those are very lovely on their own, and I think that they can stand on their own as something without the drawing process being a part of, being a part of the work, standing side by side. So. Yeah. I haven't because I don't feel confident enough in, they were kind of, I hate to say that they were sort of a last minute decision to video document, but I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Why am I not documenting this? I have to right now. So, there wasn't, I think, with certain pieces, I don't know, maybe. I mean, Anne Hamilton, I think, is a really interesting um, recorder of her process, and they're very beautifully done. I suppose if I was more honed in on my video skills and had the software for it readily available, then yeah, I might get into it. But to me, it's not as important as um, maybe as the end result, for especially for the that drawing process. The inventor side of me, that tinkerer, Rube Goldberg, of course, is a huge influence, and Arthur Ganson, Theo Janssen, Peter Fishley and David Weiss. They did this really incredible kinetic sculpture called The Way Things Go. Or it's a video called The Way Things Go, and it's this like, yeah, it's just incredible. You should check it out. So all of those artists, they have these like grandiose sculptures that are made of like sometimes like just junk and weird gears, and like, they can be these like massive like monolithic creatures that are the kind of like end result, or like the poke in the ribs at the end is just a very simple, um, simple action that happens. Arthur Ganson, for sure. Like, he has these like really incredible kinetic sculptures. And then at the very end, it's just like, it looks like a little artichoke leaf walking along this massive wheel. And they're just like really funny and quirky, but smart and beautiful. And yeah, have this really playful kind of eeriness to it. Um, Process related artists and performance or body related artists. Saul LeWitt, of course. He is kind of the master of conceptual art, and also um, making or having other people make his work via instructions. Tony Orico, he uses the body to make these beautiful drawings, these charcoal drawings. Marina Abramovich, Anna Mandietta. They're both female artists, women artists who use their body in the work. And other artists that I'm interested in, absolutely Agnes Denes, and that's Denes. Um, who else? Yayoi Kusama, David Byrne, Ava Hess, Robert Rauschenberg, Jasper Johns. And I do have this curveball, and it's an artist who I will always obsess over for this like whimsical and weird geniusness of Ralph Steadman, who is just, I mean, people would be like, really? He's one of your favorite artists? Like, yes, absolutely. He like introduced me to color and writing and action and free spirit in the hand. So yeah. There are more. I could go on. Yeah, the printmaker's hand is actually like very much removed at certain stages of the process in printing. And if you haven't ever read The Syntax of the Print by Ruth Weisberg, you absolutely should. It's kind of difficult. I can never find it online. It always takes a lot of digging for it, but it's part of the Tamarind Papers. But she actually discusses there's like this middle phase where the final work becomes removed from the matrix. And she actually labels that removal of the hand as like the quote hallmark of the printmaker's art. And, as printmakers, we typically have that direct presence of the hand on the matrix. But then in the process of replication, we actually rely upon other forces to collaborate with the final project. So, for instance, like the printing press. So I guess when I feel that there is this imbalance in my own work, when I sense that I'm like trying to control too much of the outcome of the print, then that's typically when I'll like switch gears and allow for a little chaos. And, you just got to keep things interesting for me. I kind of need this constant stimulation. So yeah, I think that, it's all about balance. When I'm feeling too much control, then I back away, and let something else speak for me. Yeah, this kind of threw me for a loop here too, because like I said earlier, like I'm very humbled by a traditional printmaker. And sometimes I feel like I'm defending myself, like, no, I really am a printmaker, but I do reference myself as an artist, sort of first. But there is this like diversity in printmaking that it's so difficult to actually pin down trends in contemporary printmaking. And and where all of us are similar, it's really hard to pin that down. But there are contemporary printmakers who are like these like, I'm gonna call them like the neo old masters, or like the neo masters or neo old masters. Like, you know, Andrew Raftery and Michael Barnes and Enrique Shigoya and Bove Lyons and Ruth Weisberg. And, these are like these kind of neo masters, like our age of these old masters, and they're sharing the same space and same ideas, and collaborating with like, Jay Ryan and Dan Stiles and these like artists who are just like pounding out these like 10, 20, 30 color, rock and roll screen print, posters like for concerts and stuff. Or, there are also these printmakers who employ turntables, like Bobby Hauser, to stand in for the press. Um, so, for me, where I belong in this community, I think it's diversity that really brings us all together, and we share this interest in diversity. And maybe that's how I'm similar to other contemporary artists or contemporary printmakers, because we are all so different and we're all so wackadoodle that like, but we do appreciate diverse approaches to printmaking, and we love to share our ideas, and that's what makes us similar.